this is live from North Woods and Waters. This is the July edition. We are North Woods and Waters of St. Croix Heritage Area, and our goal is to unite the people of the watershed to promote the natural, cultural, and historic resources we share. So where are we? We're across Minnesota and Wisconsin in 4 sovereign nations and on almost 8,000 square miles of this area. And being in such rural places makes a big difference when we have strong community centers. So if anybody here is hearing about North Woods and Waters and wants to be more engaged in their community, reach out to us, and we would love to help you connect your region and share the stories that matter to you and connect your region to the bigger piece. So what are our goals? We want to make sustainable economic opportunities which enhance our communities and the overall livability and quality of life in our heritage area. We want to connect the region to preserve and enhance the historical, cultural, and natural resources that exist here and that make our region nationally distinctive and special. We also want to increase the awareness and understanding of our heritage stories and the resources that demonstrate what makes this such a wonderful place to live and to be and to visit. And we want to do this both to raise awareness among people from within the state and from people who are visiting outside. So we are currently a heritage area, but we want to become a national heritage area. What do we need to do this? Well, we've already gotten the national parks thumbs up, we've gotten their approval, and we've worked very hard to get there. But now we need an act of Congress to become nationally designated. And once we become nationally designated, we'll be able to do what we're already doing just better. And so we need your help to connect the dots, call your Congress people, push the legislation. Yeah, stay tuned for other opportunities how to do that. So without a further ado, we're here to talk about the 4Ground Midwest Land Art Biennial. So I'm just going to pass it over to Ginger, who will introduce the rest of this great team of artists and everyone. And yeah, so I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, and it's all on you, Ginger.
It's all on me. Welcome, everyone. First, I just want to recognize that Franconia and a lot of the sites in 4Ground reside on the ancestral Dakotan lands of the Wapakouté, and Franconia works very actively to center Native artists in all of our work, in our programs. And in that vein really came the development of 4Ground in collaboration with a lot of community partners. It is a project of Franconia Sculpture Park. And I should start by saying I'm the director and curator of Franconia Sculpture Park. I've been there for 3 years. And Franconia resides along the St. Croix River Valley. And our focus now is really about the intersection of art and ecology. And so the development of 4Ground came out of a need to connect more organizations in the region who have similar missions and values, working along the St. Croix River Valley and beyond through collective fundraising, curating. I believe in, lots of people working together for a greater cause instead of everyone trying to recreate the wheel and trying to, support each other. So 4Ground was really designed to raise awareness of important ecological issues facing our community, the upper Midwest in particular, and the St. Croix region more specifically. So there's several sites in the St. Croix Valley region. And so we do this through site-specific land art, through performances, through different public programs and engagement. This is the first year that we've done it. We're about halfway through the program year. It runs through August, but there are a few things in September, and we're already planning the 2024 version as we speak with more partners and artists. So we're really excited. It is the ongoing program. So we have a number of those artists here today that I'm really excited to hear from them. It's really about their work and what they're doing. And before we start, nibiiwakamigkwe wanted to apologize for not being able to be here today. They had a bit of a family emergency, and their collaborator Anastasia may be able to join us. So if they are able to come on, we'll have them talk later. And if not, I do want to make mention of their work, which is really phenomenal. They do a Indigenous throat singing piece that's been traveling across the Midwest. They did the first performance in Rochester at the Rochester Arts Center in June. They have an upcoming performance this Sunday, July 31st at Bellwyn Conservancy. And then their final performance is in August at the Plains Art Museum. And we can see some images and videos of their work as well if they're not able to join us. So I think we'll probably start then with Rachel Frank, who will be discussing their rewilding work in general, as well as some of the upcoming projects that they'll be working on for 4Ground, both at Franconia and again at the Bellwyn Conservancy in August. Stephanie Lindquist, who is with us, they're an artist who'll be talking about the importance of soil in their work, maybe. We'll see what they have to talk about. They're an artist and really interested in the land and doing research about the soil in particular. And then lastly, we have Angie Tillges and Moheb Soliman, who will be discussing their collaborative work, poetry projects, and perhaps in particular, the longest poem for the longest poem for the largest river in America, question mark, maybe. This is why it's better to hear directly from the artist than from me. So I guess without further ado, Rachel, would you like to just start and talk about your work? Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Ginger, and thank you for having me on this program. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. So I'm Rachel Frank. I'm based in Brooklyn, but I'm originally from Kentucky. But my mom's side of the family is actually from Minnesota, from Eagan, and I have family in other parts of the state. So Minnesota is very near and dear to my heart. I'm going to talk about two different projects because the performances I'm doing this summer at 4Ground sort of intersect the two. The first of those projects is based on the environmental practice of rewilding, or reintroducing species back into environments where they once lived. This project sort of started out where I was making these large-scale masks out of fabric and then placing myself in these different environments where these species once lived. Rewilding typically involves the reintroduction of what are called keystone species, or species that even in small numbers have this big effect on the ecosystem and are sort of almost like a natural healers for the ecosystem with just some minimal human intervention. And the most famous sort of rewilding projects that most people are familiar with are wolves being reintroduced into Yellowstone National Park in 1994. But rewilding can also involve creating wildlife corridors or pathways from one wildlife area to another. These are particularly important, obviously, during climate change, where food resources might become more stressed and species need more movement, more room to move and move between ecosystems. So as I was saying, I treat these performances both very sculpturally and performatively. I make these large scale masks. Frequently, I can't actually see in these masks because they're very heavy, and I kind of like that they change my relationship to the landscape. I sort of have to make these very small movements or actually engage in what is called like still tableau vivant movements or non-movements. And in that way, I feel like I'm connecting to sort of the landscape's memory. And one reason I treat these performances both very sculpturally and performatively is because the actual rewilding projects that are going on are super performative and sculptural. This is an image of a baby California condor that is being raised by a human hand puppet. The hand puppet is the sort of orange thing so that the bird does not imprint on the handlers and can be eventually released back into the wild. This is another image of a person raising some wild whooping cranes, which are still being sort of coming back. but they're sort of teaching these young birds, fledglings, where to find food and how to look for danger, and wearing this very performative costume. They're also, rewilding can also sort of involve sort of video, performative video. This is essentially what I kind of think of as panda porn. Pandas in captivity are kind of lazy and are slow breeders. And so one of the ways people are encouraging them to mate is to basically show them porn videos of pandas having sex with other pandas. So this is obviously extremely performative. And because I'm in Brooklyn, I also like to highlight that rewilding projects don't necessarily have to be in these faraway places. In New York right now, the Billion Oyster project is going on, where we're reintroducing oysters back into the ecosystem. Oysters are actually a keystone species. And then in the 1970s, bald eagles and peregrine falcons were both reintroduced back into New York State, and now they are up and down the Hudson and even nesting within the boroughs in Staten Island. I also make standalone sculptures. This is a piece that's based on the rewilding of oysters in New York City, and these are ceramic oyster shells that are sewn onto this large scale hand. And I also work in wildlife rehabilitation, which is not rewilding per se, but also connects me to the species that live year-round in New York City or annually migrate through the city on the Atlantic corridor. And this is a picture of me with a red-tailed hawk, because I mostly work with waterfowl and hawks. So the other project that's sort of ongoing is based on these ancient Eurasian offering vessels. I have many different forms that these offering vessels take, but one form is the animal-shaped vessel, which is called the Rhyton. So I'm often interested in objects that are performative that we experience in museums, but we experience them just as objects. So I became really interested in sort of reinterpreting and reactivating these objects in an environmental fashion. So these are my versions of Rhyton vessels. This is an old original Rhyton vessel from Cyprus, just to give you context of what those forms sometimes can look like. And they typically held offering vessels of wine or olive oil, and were sort of intended to sort of help establish one's place in the world and sort of I guess encourage good things for the future. So they sort of dealt with the present, but also the future, which kind of interests me as well. So in the first iteration of using these vessels, I made a number of them and then positioned them where the tide sort of comes in, so that they fill and drain with the tides, sort of as a way of thinking about offering in relation to climate change and rising tides around our coastlines. I also did a piece that is at Franconia that was actually at the beginning of this talk, and this was the original sketch for that. I had done a previous residency at MoCA Tucson with Ginger, and I was thinking a lot about wildlife corridors and sort of the interrelationships between different species. So I made this large scale Rhyton vessel that sort of dealt with pollination. I don't know if it's still true, but when I first installed this piece, it was the only piece that was embedded within the prairie. Usually at Franconia, they mow around the sculptures so that people can get up really close to them and walk. And I was really interested in this piece being embedded within the prairie itself, so that it would sort of stand above it and interact with the ecosystem. I was really attracted to Franconia for that reason, because of the way that the native grasses and flowers are just allowed to grow in a lot of the areas, and the sort of prescribed burns that they use in the sort of indigenous way to sort of take care of the land. And so this summer for 4Ground, I'm going to be inviting people to interact with some specific Rhyton offering vessels, where they will be allowed to fill them and then sort of offer these offerings in different areas. At Franconia, it will be sort of centered around the prairie and sort of thinking about rewilding and connecting to the prairie as an offering or as a place of offering. And then the second performance is at Bellwyn. This is another image. At Valley Creek, which is their newest part of Bellwyn Conservancy. I'm also really interested in how Bellwyn has used native plants and also bison to sort of restore the prairie, and want to sort of connect to both those places, and as well as the larger community centered around Valley Creek that's been really invested in cleaning up the waterways there. So I think I'm probably at time there, and I'm going to leave it go to end there.
Thank you, Rachel. And Sashi, people can send in questions, right? Like maybe we have time. Should we do questions at the end or questions after each presentation, or?
However you want. Does it help when people put their questions into the comments or into the chat section? Or would you rather people just unmute and then ask?
People can unmute and ask. No pressure. We can also do questions at the end too, after maybe you see sort of the fuller context of everyone's work, because everyone's doing such different things. So if you want to at any time, put questions into the chat. Otherwise, yeah, we'll do questions at the end.
Yeah, great.
All right. Thank you again, Rachel. I just, I'm obviously a fan of your work. We've been working together for a while, and I'm really excited to see how you activate the space, because I know you made the piece in 2020 during the pandemic. It was sort of a challenging time for everyone. I know it's still a very challenging time for everyone, but you know, especially artists, and coming to the park at a particular time. So to be able to activate the space within this larger context and then do a companion piece at the Bell, and I'm really excited to see how that goes. So
yeah, I'm super excited.
Join us. All right, Stephanie, you're up. You're going to be talking about.
Yes, I'm going to talk a little bit about the work at Franconia, and then I will also talk about some soil paintings and how I arrived to that place. Let me just share my screen. Okay, can everybody see the site plan? Okay, cool. So thank you, Ginger. Thank you, Northwoods. I'm really grateful to be here to share my work with you all today. My name's Stephanie Lindquist. I'm originally from Los Angeles. I met Ginger in New York back in 2012, and I moved out to Minneapolis in Minnesota in 2019 to pursue my MFA at the U of M, and I'm just graduating this summer. I began with where I'm from because I really am, you know, I grew up in cities, and I'm really grateful to be in a place where I have the opportunity to connect with land a lot more. And I think part of the reason why I've pursued plants and relationship building with plants and people on land is really comes from my own heart, really for my own sense of healing, and that's where it begins. So right now, what I'm showing you is a site plan the site plan that I designed for Franconia, and this is behind the artist resident house. I worked with my main collaborator, Ethan Bryson of Natural Urban Forests, to create this new social gathering space behind the artist resident house. Those crescent moon shapes were planted on June 4th with over 500 native plants. The large crescent full of trees and shrubs at 5 different canopy layers, and the smaller crescent is full of prairie plants. One thing I should say about this planting that's pretty unique that Ethan Bryson brought to the collaboration is that he practices the Miyawaki method, which is a very dense planting. So trees are planted, you know, the length between your elbow and the end of your hands, 1 to 2 feet apart from one another, which at first I thought was just like, you know, I was really shocked. I was like, oh, we're going to plant these like pines and cedars and they're going to be like 1 to 2 feet apart. Like, how does that even work? So one of the things I learned in this process is that that trees strengthen each other, that plants strengthen each other. And so I'm excited to see this space grow, you know, over my lifetime. One of the important parts of the design that you don't see in this site plan is the perimeter around the plants. It's really important to give the plants space for those first 3 years so that they really have a shot at life. And so around these crescents are a very simple willow fence. And it's purposefully an ephemeral fence. It's purposely made out of natural material so that within so many years, it can really just disintegrate back into the landscape. But it does serve a purpose of preventing us from walking into the space, compacting the soil. For the first 3 years, like there is like pretty regular watering of the plants. After that point, the space will be, these plants will sustain themselves. Part of the reason why I was inspired to use the crescent shape for the design, I was interested in using a shape that I could repeat again and again. I've been interested in the use of fractals in African design and how they function. So I wanted to give a nod to that part of my heritage. And then I was also interested in, you know, just kind of like this metaphor of like the moon cycles and really encouraging people to walk in these cyclical round paths around the plants, around the fire pit, you know, creating the gathering space, giving it more curves rather than it being a rectilinear space. And my intention is really to slow people down in that process of walking in these circles, and hopefully begin to develop a relationship with the plants, begin to get to know who the plants are. That was my inspiration for the design. I'm going to show you some other work now. Before I skip to the soil paintings, I just want to give you a little bit of context on how I arrived at working with soil paintings. Like I said, I am you know, I came from the cities. I didn't really begin my love of plants until I was stuck in New York with very little access to land. And once I was given a bit of access to land with neighbors, it kind of just filled me back up. So one of the first things I did when gardening with neighbors is I began to create holograph prints of the plants I grew in a variety of community gardens. And different gardens were dedicated to plants from different places. So I had a community plot in South Bronx, which was dedicated to plants of African origin, including this sorghum. I had a plot dedicated to plants from here, from Turtle Island. So that included this corn, my first year of growing corn. And I show you this really because these prints are really documents of my learning. And that's kind of how I think of the printing process. And they're really an opportunity for me to reflect on what did I learn that season from these plants. This brought me to, I wanted to show you just a few images of some collages. This really kind of sent me down a rabbit hole of researching you know, the origins of plants, where they were coming from, and for myself beginning to create these maps of who's native to where, you know. And part of this is thinking about my own health, right? So in terms of my mom is from Liberia, West Africa. So in terms of like what my body, and my dad is from Northern Europe, descendant, Scandinavian. And so in terms of thinking about like what my body might really appreciate, thinking about like, well, what are the foods of my my mom in West Africa? You you know, so what are the beans I might enjoy? What are the celosia and the greens I might enjoy? What are the native rices I might enjoy? So again, I was doing this research to begin to kind of learn and document for myself and reconnect to the land. When I moved to Minnesota, I'm going to skip to the soil real quick. I had an opportunity to work my first summer at the Wajupi Tribal Gardens, which is owned by the Mdewakanton Sioux community down in Shakopee. And I really quickly learned on an organic farm that none of the plants that I love so much would be available without healthy soil. So at the beginning of grad school, I pretty quickly turned my attention to soil, started learning more about soil science, and had the opportunity I was given soils actually from all over Minnesota. And then last spring, I had the opportunity to travel to West Africa and gather soil from Liberia, where my mother is from, and then Sierra Leone, where she went to boarding school. And in gathering these soils and learning a little bit about why do they have this color, why do they have this texture, I was inspired to use it as a painting medium, as well as a printing medium. Behind these soils, so this is an image of Muhammad's bouquet, I call it. The darkest soil I gathered from the Kirk Washington Memorial Garden in North Minneapolis. And behind the soil is a cyanotype print. And the cyanotype print has been an important form for me, just kind of like those collagraphs, and even really like the collagraphs of kind of like, how can I document a place pretty immediately. And it began more with plant prints in the garden, but then I quickly realized that, oh, I'm documenting my interaction with community in these gardens. I can translate that to the cyanotype. So I'm bringing both the sun element, the light element, and I'm bringing the soil to the image. And I guess maybe I'll end with saying that, soil is really important for me because I feel like soil replies to my desire to belong somewhere, right? And this is a double-edged sword, right? When I think about my ancestors that arrived in Liberia, on my mom's side, like 40% died within their first year of arriving in Liberia. And that's because of all of the different microbes in the environment that their bodies weren't used to, right? So soil is not necessarily always a welcoming, is always welcoming. Soil can also be really dangerous, right? But it does reply to my desire to belong, right? And to get to know this place, land of Dakota and Ojibwe. And so another part of my inspiration and my practice is really just learning about Indigenous knowledge systems. That really feeds me a lot. And I probably am hitting time, but I'd like to say that I'm really grateful for the next year. I will be working as a resident artist at Macalester College. And I'm working with a group of artists, scientists, and activists who are trying to engage the public with water quality issues with the Mississippi. So I'm really excited to turn my attention to this new element and kind of continue to work in this interdisciplinary way. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. And yeah, I think it's interesting because obviously we all know this, there's such a symbiotic relationship between the land and the water. And I think when I think about like, oh, the North Woods and Waters Heritage Area, it's not just the water, it's the land and all of the ecosystems around there. I guess, Stephanie, like, have you learned anything about the particular soil of this region, of the St. Croix region, particularly like where Franconia is at or around there?
Oh, I would say
any knowledge you want to drop?
I mean, all of Minnesota, I mean, we have like the different glacial lobes that form this area in the soil and give it its different color depending on the parent material that the glacial material rocked up. That's why, you know, along the eastern side of Minnesota, we have all these deep reds, and further south we have more of like the yellow and the carbonates. So nothing in particular. I guess the most information I have would be from like the soil sample that we collected at the site. And
A lot of heavy metals, right?
Well, no, I would say, you know, one of the cool things that was different for me to see in the soil sample was that Ethan was really focused on the microbes and the fungal health of the soil. And so that was really new for me to look at. And so that was low. And so that's something that with this new forest there, within a few years from the other forests that Ethan's worked on around the country, from his experience, he's expecting us to see a lot more fungal activity in the next.
Yeah, I learned a lot about that from him. Fungal dominated. We want to be fungal dominated. Fungus is our friend. Thank you, Stephanie. And thank you, Marty, for putting that beautiful quote from Stephanie in there. I've learned a lot from Stephanie over the years, and I'm just happy to continue working with you. And Angie and Moheb, what you two up to?
Hey, a little bit of everything, guys. I will do my part and share a screen as well. Hang on. Let's see if it goes full. There it is. All right, can you all see my screen? Okay. Thanks to Northwoods and to 4Ground, and thanks so much to the artists who have shared their work thus far. It's super interesting to learn what you all are up to. I'm sharing with you all today about an ongoing project called The Longest Poem for the Longest River in North America. This project started back in 2018, and it had zero intentions of being an art project or a poetry project for that matter. My work is at the intersection of culture, environment, and public life. I'm currently here in Dakota Homeland, also known as St. Paul, and in a fellowship with the city of St. Paul and with the Mississippi River. And simply in my city work, I was looking for a way to bring the river beyond the banks of the Mississippi to the neighborhoods and communities that are not joined up directly with the Mississippi. Something, you know, that could be like low key and approachable, and that would welcome in lots of different perspectives and experiences and relationships to water and the river. And I landed in that on some pretty simple ingredients. One, that I know that art is a great catalyst for conversation and expression. Two, that while I am not a poet, I've been fortunate through my work to have become familiar with an incredible network of writers, language stewards, culture makers, culture keepers, who are working all across the Mississippi River watershed. And three, I knew that in bringing those folks together with the public, a wild set of ideas would begin to emerge that tell us something about the contemporary relationship to the Mississippi River, something collective, something beyond Mark Twain, something that's more of this moment. And so I'm going to share more about that project and structure in just a moment, and an example of the poetry that comes from it. But I want to give you a sense of this kind of like incredible network of writers who are out there literally voicing water. I met Moheb Soliman a while back at an event where he was giving a reading from his book of poetry called Homes. And where he was literally like writing the edges of the Great Lakes. So I'm gonna turn it over to Moheb to talk a little bit about his work, and then we'll jump back into the river.
Thanks, Angie. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I hope you can see me. Oh my goodness. Wow, Angie. Thanks. I don't even, I was like, I don't have a copy of this thing to hold up, but I don't need to. So yeah, this is my first book of poems that I was working on for so long. Um, it was just kind of an accumulation of writing that I had going while I was doing a lot of other actually interdisciplinary projects that always kind of included language and text and poetry. Sometimes it was performance work, installation work, sort of social practice work. Although at the time, I didn't really think about that and the work in those terms. And it was all coming out of just this really long immersion, literally and metaphorically, um, in the Great Lakes region as a borderland and as a bioregion, which, to me, there's a huge tension there. It's, one watershed, and yet it's just such a massively fractured space as a borderland between states, countries, of course, Native, First Nations, Indigenous um, communities all over North America. And, I was kind of looking for my own entry point as someone who's not from the United States. I'm from Egypt and moved to the US as a kid. And, the more I kind of lived all around and grew up in Ohio, Michigan, Canada, now in Minnesota, kind of thinking about, how I claim a place here and, where my narrative of kind of belonging and identity enters the larger picture and, the different historical levels and the complexities of those, sometimes really, controversial histories. At the same time, I was still really just like in love with the larger than life region, and people who aren't from the Midwest or from especially from Great Lakes states, really just don't understand the power of that water and that space and this one coherent watershed. And I sort of felt like there was a tension in sort of trying to understand how we can have a relationship with this sublime region and yet still kind of try to parse environmental issues, really urgent necessary social justice and um, kind of, I guess for lack of a better term, political issues, although I feel like there's a lot more there than that. So the poems that I kept kind of putting together, I feel are very much nature poems. They're just kind of working towards understanding nature in a very postmodern way and trying to kind of move through different, paradigms like environmental discourses or social justice discourses or technological discourses, and still trying to kind of figure out a relationship to the places that we're trying to be from. So I don't know, I'm going on and on here. Angie, is this where I'm supposed to just shut up and read a poem, or was that at another? Okay, great. Let me just, so there's all that. I wanted to read you one of the poems from this book, and it's the second to last page of the book, and it's maybe the only poem in this whole thing that I feel like actually has some kind of like naive, happy, blissed out kind of, expression in it. And that's truly how I felt. And, the decade that I spent traveling all around this region, it's just that so much of the other work kind of didn't really get there for some reason. So I think this is a good poem to read. And I think it really connects to so much of what Angie and I were kind of talking about and thinking about in this brief moment of interaction. So it's called On the Water. And the world entire would load before your eyes. And there's no more. And cache is clear, and all songs stream at once. The sound delayed, avatars retired, and all seasons complete at once. With the earth tilted on its axis no more, the weekend's lightning languorous, arms stretched after lunch. You can't take more. And the robes are soaked, why they can't absorb another drop. And what's more, washes over unimpeded now. And there's more. The morning after, all justice meted out, all grudges would be lost in the cloud, and power would go out, and all leisure would be more radical then, and the fight would go out of you with the world at your fingertips, guiding your hand to the ends of luxury. It doesn't get any better than this. There's more of the same, and who could want more? So I think, yeah, that's just a little bit of that book, and really so many of the other poems are really different. But you know, I just would say to really quick try to throw it back to you, Angie. You know, I just really like treasure the ability to be able to use something like so intimate as poetry in public space. And, you know, that's been such a part of my interdisciplinary practice that, you know, this book has dabbled in, but I really loved the opportunity to be able to try to kind of think about how can we get people in these public spaces to still work with language, and, you know, finding a way for that to sort of still be, you know, qualitative, you know, and it's not just kind of a moment, but, you know, we understand the world through language, and it's such a scrim, and sometimes it's such a limitation. So to be able to kind of really put people in public space and in natural spaces where they can kind of work with that was, to me, sort of the exciting part of thinking about your project. And, you know, hearing you all talk is just really, you know, it's really lucky for me to be here and kind of hear about how you're all approaching these things. So Angie, please talk some more.
Moheb, thank you so much. So you get it, right? So this is what I mean about this incredible sort of river-wide ecosystem of people who are writing water. And so, again, not a poet myself, but knowing of these folks up and down the Mississippi, I invited 3 folks. So Moheb, and I want to shout out 2 other collaborators on this project. So Righteous Soul from Memphis, Tennessee, and then my friend Monique Verdam, who is in Louisiana at the edge of the Mississippi in the Atchafalaya Basin, Bayou Teche, also known as the United Homa Nation. So each of these artists are really incredible. Once I'm done talking, I'll drop their links into the chat so you can get into their work. And, you know, jumping back into this Mississippi River thinking, I asked these poets to phrase an additive poem about the Mississippi. Their parameters were really few. The only requirements that it be about the river and connected to place, and that it leave space for the public to fill in their perspective. So a sort of fill in the blank poetic exercise, if you will. Linking these poems together is where we get the form and the basis for the longest poem for the longest river. And for the 4Ground Biennial, this particular series of poems is being brought around to many different kinds of public and community functions, each time resulting in a new poem. So just to give you a sense of like what this looks like here, you know, very, very long format that grows over the course of the day. So there's a little section here that I'll share with you from an event, a 4Ground event at Kinstone in Wisconsin. And this was written on the solstice, and I'll just read a tiny bit of it. The river flows down from Lake Itasca and joins with other rivers, lands, and people before the Gulf of Mexico. The Wawarone frog calls out from the forgotten swamp, disconnected long ago by earthen levees and concrete walls girdled in stone unfamiliar. Calling out in love, I see you, to the ancestral river as she flows south, carrying the weight of the watershed north. Funneled between colonial constructs and silly switchbacks for hundreds of miles. Destination, ocean basin. Destination, our blood. A river determined to meet coastal marshes and saltwater estuaries in an order to fulfill commitment to peoples, plants, and animals. and 2 planetary water cycles, but deprived of respect, deprived of self-determination. What are the rights of the Mississippi? I think she has the right to be free, healthy, and respected. I think I have the right to be who I am because we are kin. Our common well deserves respect. The Mississippi comes gushing out of my tap, tasting like sweet nectar. I greet the river saying, I love you today and every day. She sounds like the universe ringing in our hearts. The river never sleeps, like the moon, shadow and light eternally linked. At the bottom of the river lives the answers you seek. So you can see here in this last little clip, sort of how the poem is set up prior to, and all those little underlines were sections that were filled in. So I can link to a version of the kind of full poem that I read today, but that's a snippet for you all. And for those of you who are St. Croix connected, we will be writing the Valley Creek into the St. Croix River and into the Mississippi River at Bellwyn on August 21st, and would love to have you all join us. So thanks, I'll turn it back over to Ginger.
Yeah, thanks for, well, thank you both for talking about this project. And just to reiterate, yeah, August 21st, same date as Rachel's performance at the Bellwyn too. So y'all get to meet each other in person. Thank you. I'm still processing Moheb's poem. It was beautiful. And, you know, you were talking about this region as a borderland, and it's something that I've been thinking about more as well. You know, I've a recent Minnesota transplant. I've been here for 3 years, and previously was doing a lot of work along the US-Mexico border, and was trying to think about, you know, sort of how to find my place here. And I find my place in the places in between, you know, and I definitely viewed this place as a borderland as well. And I've tried to communicate that to some people who just didn't understand what I was talking about. But I think that there's a lot of similarities about what's going on here. And, you know, also just thinking about how we can eliminate, you know, geographical or psychological borders and the work that we're doing. But I think that was a lot of the goals of 4Ground too. Like, we don't need to be confined by the socio-geographic borders that the government sets up. You know, like we think of, like, you look at a map and you're like, oh, there's these states, but really, like, these state lines don't really mean anything and haven't meant anything for millennia to different people that have lived here, and just trying to eliminate all of that and all of us to work together. So yeah, thank you for sharing the link to your work. And now would be a great time if anyone has any questions for all of these amazing creative folks that I feel so incredibly honored to know and work with. It's like, this is why I'm a curator, is just so I get to hang out with cool people.
I'm gonna ask the first question, and this is kind of based off of Stephanie's conversation and project and everything. But I was wondering, to the whole group, how does home and where you're from, they could be different places, impact your work and your worldview?
That's some serious question.
Maybe I should start with a softball. I don't know.
I can start us off. I mean, I know where I was born, I know where I've been raised, but I definitely feel like I'm like searching for home, like very actively. And I'm trying to get into like the practice of being home. I really, Moheb, something you said before reading the poem, learning about the places we're trying to belong, that really kind of hit me, you know, because I've been like trying to belong. I think that's a good place to be, rather than like not trying to belong, not trying to maybe respect the natural laws of the universe around us. But yeah, I'm still trying to find that home around me, in me.
Well, I think most artists are, right? I mean, you're asking these questions and constantly seeking. I know myself as a curator, I've never really felt like I have a home. Like I've always say I fit in anywhere because I don't fit in anywhere, you know. I've traveled and lived all over, but I've never been like, oh, this is my home, you know. And I think I'm constantly searching for that. Hence the fact I've moved so much. It's like, but I think as a curator, I just want to create the world that I want to live in and invite people to be a part of that world. And it's just surrounding myself with really awesome people like you to, get me to think about, just life and how we can make a difference while we're here. And,
I'm interested in sort of the connection between all of these artists. Ginger, you and others have assembled this amazing team, and this is just a part of your team. There are many other artists that are involved with what you're doing. Are there opportunities for all of these artists to come together like tonight to talk about what they're doing? Because I find you so beautiful and inspiring, and I know that the work of the artist often is isolated and alone. You work by yourself a lot. And so I just wonder if you have been coming together, because this has enriched me just listening to you. And I'm guessing everything's firing between all of you as you speak.
Well, there are like over 35 artists that are participating in 4Ground. The majority of them are local, but some of them are, across the United States. Like, Rachel's in New York. A lot of them come with totally different worldviews and experiences, which is super important. We had, for those that were local, we had a sort of mixer jump off event dinner thing for, the artists to get together in person, because a lot of them don't get to see each other, and obviously everyone's work intersects, even though they're creating work in different mediums. And it's important for people to make those connections and to create their own community. I didn't call myself a curator for a really long time because I don't usually curate tradition. I don't I don't typically put paintings on walls or anything. Like, for me, I think of myself more as a community organizer. My background is actually in anthropology. So when you get that, it's like, oh, this makes sense. Like, I think a lot of the works in 4Ground are not what people consider traditional artworks. These are all, for me, obviously artworks, but people with a more Eurocentric understanding of visual art may be like, oh, how is a community garden art? How is this poem art? How is this rewilding practice art? But for me, it's all about culture and expressing culture and getting people to expand, their idea of what art is, and ecology too. For me, it is really about that intersection of art and environmentalism. And, I always say you bring people in with the art, but then you hit them over the head with the message. You lure them in with the pretty things, but then while they're there, you can talk about, some pretty heavy stuff. And I think that's the great thing about art, is that we can have difficult conversations that maybe you can't with other mediums, in a way that, you can bridge different, worldviews or understandings. And I think, I see this, linking it back to the St. Croix River and this particular region. Franconia is in Minnesota. We're right along the St. Croix River. Wisconsin's right there, and there is quite a divide even between the audiences that come to Franconia from Minnesota and Wisconsin. It is a border land. And how do we use the river as a tool for communication and understanding it? Rivers and confluences have historically been meeting places for people to communicate verbally or transfer goods. And I think about how we can, use this space that we're in to continue having those conversations. And Yeah, I'm rambling now. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just happy to know all of you.
I'd love to maybe piggyback and have a question for the artists, for Rachel, Angie, and Moheb. I've been thinking a lot about what you were just saying, Ginger, about kind of like the heaviness of really all the topics that we're engaging in, right? Whether it's rewilding, Rachel, when you're talking about the wolves in Yellowstone, I've been reading about bison a lot. So I've been thinking about the bison in Yellowstone, or thinking about the Mississippi and all the really terrible things we do to pollute and try to control water. And I've been thinking about kind of like the job of artists. You know, I'm meeting more activists and I'm seeing them burnt out. And I'm thinking about how to kind of like nurture and like feed their souls, right? Because that work is so important. So I'm curious for all of you, like, the topics we engage in, although we might make it look pretty on the surface, right? They can be incredibly painful and heart-wrenching. And I'm wondering, I don't know if you guys have anything on your mind that you can share about how you pull through, what strategies you have, whether for your audience or just yourself.
Yeah, I think I can kind of touch on like that and the sort of the question of home a little bit. So yeah, my mother's family was from Minnesota, and she was raised on a farm, and she was the one that sort of instilled this like love of nature and the environment in me. I was actually named for Rachel Carson, the environmentalist, by her. So like, you know, it's sort of like, I feel like it's in my blood. And she passed away suddenly from an illness like over 15 years ago now. But I do think like the rewilding work, like while it's not something I always really talk about, like really does relate to the idea of like loss and renewal for me in that way. And it's very like personal for me. And it's also something that like I think is really like deeply important in sort of our environmental age right now of sort of not giving up on landscapes and not giving up on sort of regions, and finding ways to sort of work with these natural actors, whether they be plants or species or animals, to sort of help heal those ecosystems. And I think that in turn, those also like often really involve people. Like I did a residency in a remote area of Western Alaska where wood bison had been reintroduced from Canada, and spent a lot of time talking to a lot of the people that lived on the edge of this wildlife refuge in the indigenous villages there, and just talking to them about the ways that like the bison both were transforming the ecosystem, but also like having this impact on their lives, and the ways that they fought for those bison to come back, I think is really like interesting. And so I think that there's like, I don't know, I've always been really excited about rewilding, and I really like that there's like a very much of a human aspect in it, because people are needed to sort of repair those things. And we spend a lot of time thinking about the ways that people are detrimental to the ecosystem and to nature in a way that like we're always seen as very separate from it, but we're not really separate from it. So like, I think it's really important to sort of also think about the ways that we could, you know, enable those natural actors and to enable nature to sort of heal itself as well. So maybe I'll end it there. Yeah.
And I would just add, you know, to your question, which is such a good one, I think it's thinking about new forms around activism, around advocacy, around conservation, around like all of these approaches. It's, you know, the artist has an opportunity to think about new forms. So for example, in my case, while my training and background is in arts and culture, I've taken a stance to work in municipalities and have been doing, you know, my work within city governance structures now, both in the city of Chicago and here now in the city of St. Paul. And I feel like what I have the opportunity to offer as an artist is a new format for power to all sit at the table together. So if I'm doing my good job, like my job as a public servant, right? I'm really serving the public. So whatever sort of activism or voice or thing is rising from the neighborhood level, and the power of kind of the governance structure and the people who have like the little, you know, legitimate sort of political power, and finding new ways for those folks to be in dialogue together. And so for me, that has been a refreshing way to try to look at our constructs around supporting environment, supporting kind of issue-based work, community, land, all of that. Regina, you should ask your question. I think there's a hand.
Oh, thanks. I'm Regina Flanagan, and actually I've worked in public art and within state and government areas for a long time, and including, Angie, if you're working with the city of St. Paul, I did a lot of work with them about 10 years ago, and Moheb and I worked together on the Nicollet Mall project. So looking at, you know, the issue about where you get energy to continue and be inspired to actually, you know, have your work have the input or the kind of effect that you hope, because you care so deeply. There's time periods where your energy ebbs and flows. And I would just encourage you to keep going. I've been sitting in on all of these sessions and going to a lot of the 4Ground projects because I'm going to be writing about it for Landscape Architecture magazine. That's one way that I can get your thinking before a group of people that landscape architects and planners and designers that have that kind of influence. I also have been appointed in the past by the Minnesota State Arts Board to sit on the State Designer Selection Board. The Arts Board appoints someone to sit on these boards that help select architects, engineers, planners, etc., that actually design things. And I'm so pleased. I sat on the board during the time the Bell Museum, for example, was the architects were selected for that. And if you've been there, it's pretty darn amazing. So, you know, I would just encourage you to take heart, look for people like me and others that can help you get the word out. Moheb, for example, I worked on the website for the Nicollet Mall project. So arts administrators are realizing, you know, that there are many avenues, just as Ginger's recognized tonight, that to have you talk to us through Northwoods, you know, is a way to help get your thinking more well known. And it also is a good way for all of you to connect with people that can give you energy too, and kind of sustain you in these topics that you care so deeply about.
Thank you for all of your thoughts. And it's wonderful to make contact with you, and I'm glad that you're here tonight. All right. Does anybody else have any more questions or thoughts that they want to put out there? If not, I'm just going to say a few last words about just things coming up, how to stay in contact. Does that sound good?
Sorry, can I just say one last thing?
Please.
I don't mean to interrupt.
No,
My apologies. I just feel like I should say something on behalf of Anastasia and nibiiwakamigkwe, who could not be here this evening. They had a last minute family emergency. But if you're around this Sunday, July 31st, I would highly encourage you to come see their throat singing performance at Bellwyn. Lots of really cool stuff at Bellwyn this summer. It's phenomenal. It is beautiful. It is healing. It is educational. You'll learn a lot about throat singing, about both Inuit and Ojibwe culture, and you'll even get to participate. And so July 31st at the Bellwyn, or August 21st at the Bellwyn. So 2 really great days to go to. And then also, just if you want to hear more about 4Ground, it's 4groundbiennial.org, or you can follow us on Instagram at 4groundbiennial, number 4. I'll put it in the chat. So thank you, everyone.
Wonderful, great. Yeah, thank you for promoting everything. I put that on my to-do list. I was like, ask Ginger to say every date again. So thank you for doing that. All right. So the next live that's coming up is an open mic in September. And so we'd love to hear your voices again. We'd love to hear from you or anybody else that you like talking to. Pass them our way. And if you want to hear more shows like this, if you want to see the rerun of this, if you want to send this to a friend that didn't show up tonight, this will be posted on our YouTube and also on our website at northwoodsandwaters.com/live from Northwoods and Waters. And you can just find it underneath the programs tab. So if you want to stay connected with the St. Croix River watershed, we've created an online guide to in-person and virtual events that are throughout the watershed. Links, our online guide, will specifically, we can specify geographic areas, which makes a big difference with a big watershed like this. So check that out for other great events like this. And also, if you want to hear more stories from the watershed, or if you want to become a St. Croix watershed or St. Croix storyteller, you can sign up at our website and you can share more stories like this. But yeah, that's it. Thank you, everyone, especially the artists and everyone else who came. This has been such a wonderful time. I had so much fun. I'm gonna stop sharing. Yeah, thank you all. Hopefully we'll see you at this weekend at the throat singing or August 31st. Is that it?
21st, August 21st.
21st. Ah, okay, great. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.